Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Well, happy Friday, hopefully. We're having a special show today because of the importance of what happened this week with the Supreme Court. So we're going to have an extra episode to talk about all these things. You know that motto I have, or logo, if you will, about how you're entitled to my opinion. I think it's more true today than ever because this is my opinion. And I went to this, went to my sponsors and said, I want to talk about what happened with the Supreme Court leak and the decision, the impact of the decision, whatever else. And I was going to ask them, do you really, want to be, tied to this particular episode? Because it's such a controversial issue, and some people take things to extremes and things of that nature. But to a person, they said that they wanted to have this discussion aired. Now, let's be very clear what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with everything I'm going to say. It doesn't necessarily mean that what I'm saying to them or saying to y'all now is the position they share. If you want to know what they think about this, you can ask them yourselves. Be frank, but the point is that I'm very, very appreciative of sponsors that will encourage this kind of open discussion. Their opinions are across the board, and that's fine. Just like most Americans are. Most Americans have an opinion on this, but there's so many that there's so many variations of that opinion, and they reflect that. But I just appreciate the sponsors for making these kind of things possible. But this is my opinion. This is what I think. And they didn't try to tell me what I should say other than just be as factual as you can. That was about the only thing they said. They didn't say take this position or that position. So I thank the sponsors for that. But being the type of topic this is, I'm going to probably foreclose the rundown of the ads. You know who the sponsors are, and I thank them very much. Where do I start? The Supreme Court leak is where I'll start. Is this unprecedented? Well, in my experience, it is. Now, I've been doing a little research about this, and it has happened in a sense before, but not like this. Not like this. There have been times where signals have been sent from within the court about how they're going to rule. There's this one occasion, in fact, ironically enough, Roe versus Wade itself, a friend of mine shared me an article about that, where they were going to announce the decision of Roe versus Wade, and they'd given the decision early to Time magazine, and then they delayed the announcement, but Time ran it anyway. But in this case, this is an unknown leak, and I've been reading all the Washington parlor games about, what was the purpose of this leak, or who would benefit from it, or who would be, who would gain the most from it, and all this other stuff. Personally, I really don't know. I don't know at this point. I didn't care. I know John Roberts is furious and livid, etc. But the point is that it really doesn't matter anymore. My personal guess is it was from somebody that opposed this decision and was trying to stir up the American people and the Democrat Party and to, rouse them up to oppose this ruling. That's very possible. It's also been speculated it came from the conservative side to kind of put people that might be wavering, like Kavanaugh, put them in a position where they're going to have to stick with their original vote. Now, this vote has already been taken, by the way. The vote was taken back in December when this case was heard, and then this opinion was written in February, and it was just now recently leaked. It was to be presented to the public in about 6 weeks from now. Usually, the Supreme Court will save the most, shall we say, most controversial rulings until the last week of June. But the impact is interesting. That's a good word to put it, a way to put it as well. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the impact that Roe versus Wade has had, not just on the content of the ruling, but what the impact of the ruling itself has had on our republic and the politics of it and our judicial processes. But also going to go through Alito's decision. Alito is the author of the leaked document. He is the lead justice on this. And if this is the document that becomes the case, It'll become known as the Dobbs case. DOBBS will be known as the Dobbs case. Dobbs versus it's a Mississippi case about restrictions on abortion. He'll be the main author of it, and the others will be either co-signers of it or they'll have consenting opinions, but that affirm the verdict, but maybe have different reasons. Now, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what Alito actually said. I want to talk about some of the criticisms of this, and also talk about some of the responses by particularly Mr. Biden, which I tell you, Mr. Biden, he's the Democrats' worst enemy on this. I got to tell you that right now. And I'm not just saying it from social media rants about him, but I listened to his comments about it, and he's made such a hash of it this week that if I were a pro-choice advocate and a Democrat, I'd be furious with him. Now, full disclosure, most of y'all who've listened to the show or know me personally know that I'm pro-life. I'm not really approaching about trying to convince the other side of the rightness of my cause. That is an argument that I won't win. It's an argument that causes estrangement. It's a conclusion one has to come to themselves. I'm not here to tell you, the pro-choice listeners, that you're wrong and all this other stuff. That's not it. I'm here to talk about the ruling itself. I'm here to talk about the impact it's going to have. Again, I am pro-life. I have been a very enthusiastic supporter of Next Step Women's Center, who gives women abortion alternatives. I am very big advocate of adoptions, which is an alternative to abortion. But again, I'm not here to tell you that if you don't agree with me, there's something wrong with you or morally defective. This is, again, a conclusion you're going to have to come to yourselves. I'm here to talk about the ruling and its impact. Do I like the ruling? I like the ruling not just because of the content. Okay, I like the ruling because I didn't like Roe versus Wade, and I'm not alone in that. I didn't like Roe versus Wade for what it did to our country and how it was decided, and the nature of the courts take it upon itself to create policy where the Constitution is silent, and it's caused a 49-year controversy that has divided our country in no way since slavery issues back in the 19th century. I can't think of any issue in the last 30 years that's caused more animosity and more angst and more division amongst family members and friends than this particular issue. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way the Roe versus Wade case was decided and the impact it had and how it took away from the people of the states and people of this country the ability to negotiate and to legislate this problem in the democratic process that was designed by our government and our Constitution. I want to say that again for clarity. The biggest problem I had versus Roe versus Wade, other than the content, which I'm really not addressing as such, is that it took away from the American people the ability to negotiate and to legislate these things for ourselves. Now, it boils down to, really, do you believe that abortion is a right enshrined in the Constitution? And if you think it is or you think it's not, that's going to determine how you think about it. Personally, I don't think it's a right that's enshrined in the Constitution. However, as Alito says in his ruling, it is something that the people of these various states can decide for themselves. So there's nothing, just like there's nothing in the Constitution that mandates or supports the idea that abortion is a right. There's nothing in it that bans it either. Okay? There's nothing in the Constitution that bans abortion, just like there's nothing in it that mandates it as a right. The Constitution, in my opinion, and the opinion of Mr. Alito, apparently, and very many others, is that it's silent on this issue. And it's something for the people themselves to decide. And I'm going to go with a quote on that. Here's somebody I'm going to quote that had very serious misgivings about Roe versus Wade. Okay, let me get to the page here because this would be from Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 1992, the year before she was appointed by Bill Clinton to be on the Supreme Court. She says that measured motions seem right to me in the main for constitutional as well as common law adjudication. Doctrinal limbs too swiftly shaped, experienced teachers may prove unstable. The most prominent example in recent decades is Roe versus Wade. So even Ruth Bader Ginsburg had reservations about the way Roe versus Wade was decided. She goes on to say in this speech, suppose the court had stopped there, rightly declaring unconstitutional, the most extreme brand of law in the nation, and had not gone on, as it did the court did in Roe, to fashion a regime blanketing the subject, a set of rules that displaced virtually every state law then in force. A less encompassing Roe, one that merely struck down the extreme Texas law and went no further on that day, I believe, and will summarize why, might have served to reduce rather than fuel controversy. So basically, what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said the year before she was put on the Supreme Court is that Roe versus Wade was too expansive, too complete, I guess, and it said this is a right, and no state has a right to short circuit that. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is nobody's idea of pro-life. She was an ardent pro-choice, and did so in all the rulings she ever sat in on. There weren't that many actually, and because the last significant Supreme Court decision on abortion was 1992 in a case called Casey versus Planned Parenthood. But the point is that she said that it was not appropriately decided in a sense, because you have a situation where the Supreme Court is just saying, okay, all the state laws that restrict it are unconstitutional, rather than letting the people of the various states work these things out themselves. What she said, if they just struck down the Texas law and went no further, then this process of adjudicating through the states would have continued. Not adjudicating, that's not the legislating, that's the word I want to use. It would have continued through the states. Now, abortion was already legal in a third of the country, and in another third, there was provisions for it in certain cases. And then you had Texas, which was in that bottom third, or not bottom third, that's a poor way of putting it, I'm sorry. The other third that said that that they had very strict rules about it. Abortion was legal in Texas under very strict circumstances prior to 1973. Most states had it prior to 1973 in some circumstances. Some had pretty liberal circumstances. And that whole system of the states working through this process for themselves was short-circuited by 6 men on the Supreme Court, which is, I'm going to make some ironic statements at the end about how people are really upset by 5 men or women, I guess, because Amy Coney Barrett's allegedly among the 5, which I'm sure she is, that they're saying these 5 people are making a decision for all these women. Well, in 1973, you had 6 men do it, 6 white men. Well, Thurgood Marshall, I forgot him. He's a gentleman of color. But the point is that you had 6 men said, yes, it's a right. And most states were working themselves to a point where they could either decide for themselves or not. And these 6 men said, no, it's a right. Go on your way. But even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is the patron saint, the notorious RBG, says that Roe versus Wade did more damage to the cause that she thought was important than any other decision. And I would say Roe versus Wade, set aside the content of it, has done tremendous damage, because you look at the last 49 years, and like I mentioned before, no other issue has been quite so divisive as abortion. Second of all, it's made a complete shambles of our judicial selection process, because all this stuff you hear about, well, I'm going to check about this justice or that justice for these type of issues. That's a mirage. It's all boiled down to Roe versus Wade the last 30 years. That's the only thing that matters in these judicial hearings. The reason why the Democrats were so intense about Kavanaugh and Barrett and Gorsuch had nothing to do with their conservative ideologies in other areas. It was all about abortion. And had Kavanaugh had a record of supporting abortion, first of all, he wouldn't have been nominated, but let's say he was anyway, the Democrats would never have brought up stuff he did in high school, because it didn't matter, because he supported their side of the argument. And it's made a complete shambles of our judicial process. The Kavanaugh hearings were a disgrace. The Barrett hearings were a disgrace. They tried to make her out as some sort of freak. But the point is that it didn't matter if they, about their opinions on anything else but Roe versus Wade, and that's it. And that's why it's such a difficult thing to go over. There's other people that said this same thing. Many of y'all, most of y'all, unless you really dig in the weeds like I do for this kind of stuff, may not be familiar with the Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe. Now, Lawrence Tribe is like the Democrat Party's go-to guy for legal opinions. He's always on the news. He's been on the talk shows and Sunday morning talk shows a lot. He's kind of like the Democrat legal guru, okay? And he also has expressed reservations about Roe versus Wade and the way it was decided and what it did to the legislative process. And so this is not strictly something you're going to hear on Hannity or Carlson. This is going to be something that even some of the liberals on the side that support abortion absolutely say that Roe versus Wade was not a good way to do this. Now, I reiterate, I am pro-life, and I support the idea of the legislative process going forward, and I support all the alternatives to abortion that are provided for us out there. But that being said, we need to really understand what Alito said and not rely on the shouters and screamers, the hair pullers in social media or on MSNBC, or even on, there's a couple others that have been making a big deal about this, and they're not really telling you exactly what Alito is saying. And so I'm going to read significant portions of the leaked document. It comes out in Politico, which is the same document, or same publication rather, same website that had the original leak. Okay, let's see where we're going to start off. Okay, here it's going to be I'm going to just summarize it, and then I'm going to hit it from the more particulars in a minute. One of the main quotes, and I may repeat it later, is from the document, is quote from Mr. Alito, Justice Alito: Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. And far from bringing a national settlement on the abortion issue, Roe and Casey, which is a case I referred to in 1992, Roe and Casey have inflamed debate and deepened division. And I believe that to be true. In the Casey versus Planned Parenthood case in 1992, it was a Pennsylvania case where Planned Parenthood was suing the governor, a guy named Bob Casey, who ironically his son Bob Jr. is in the Senate, and he's a very big supporter of abortion. Bob Casey was not. Bob Casey Sr., and they were suing some of the restrictions he placed on Planned Parenthood and abortion provision. And the courts basically said in their ruling that Roe versus Wade is going to be basically upheld, and in their arrogance, they said this should settle the issue. And that's almost a direct quote. They said basically what they want to do in that Casey case in 1992 is say, okay, here's our ruling. We're tired of bringing this up. It's over. And of course, it didn't happen that way. And what's ironic is that 3 of the justices that supported the Casey ruling were appointed by Republican presidents. The decisive vote, the 5-4 vote, the decisive vote was appointed by Reagan, Anthony Kennedy, who's done that more than once in his career, or did. He's no longer on the court. Kavanaugh replaced him. Now, he goes on to say, this is another quote that I'll probably come back to again. The Constitution does not prohibit the states of each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion. Roe and Casey arrogated that authority. We now overrule those decisions and return that authority to the people and their elected representatives. That's kind of a side issue that I think is kind of interesting to me, is that some people in the political life may not be very happy about this, because now they're on the hook. There are a lot of people that have gone to us and come to us over and over and over again that said, oh, you need to vote for me to protect abortion rights, or you need to vote for me because I'll help you overturn abortion. And then when they get in office, oh, well, the courts, that darn Supreme Court, particularly the Republican Party, has used this quite often to say, well, you need to vote for us so we can, overturn abortion. Then when they get in office, they start backpedaling. Well, blame the Supreme Court, not me. Now they're on the hook. If this ruling does, in fact, become official, which I assume it will be, now you're going to be able to ask your elected representatives, what are you going to do about this? They're not going to be able to hide behind the Supreme Court rulings anymore. They're going to be responsible across the country, whether or not we have more or less liberalized abortion laws, more or less we have more or less restrictions on it. It's going to be the Republicans in particular. They're going to have to answer, because now they can't hide behind Roe versus Wade or the Casey case and say, well, darn them. Okay. Same thing with the Democrats. You're going to have a situation where they're going to have to really put it, it's easy maybe for a Democrat in Illinois to say, I'm in favor of, abortion rights. Now they're going to actually be given the responsibility of making votes on the record about these kind of things. So there you are. Now, one of the concerns, I'm going to kind of jump to this concern before I get into the ruling itself, is that this ruling, if it does stand, which I assume it will, could be used in other cases that are considered to be civil rights that may not be explicit in the Constitution. In other words, Mr. Biden doing what he does best, throwing sand in our eyes about it. He's talking about, well, now they're going to come for the gay marriage. Now they're going to come for this, and all these other civil rights, and they're going to sell to you in the election that now the civil rights of Black Americans are going to be at risk, and that gay marriage is going to be overturned. I have zero confidence about any of those things happening. They won't happen. Okay, but even if somebody wants to, go down that line of thought, here's what Mr. Alito says in his opinion. We emphasize that our decision concerns the constitutional right to abortion and no other right. Nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast doubt on precedents that do not concern abortion. So if anybody wants to try to undo gay marriage, they can't use this argument to do it, because he explicitly says it only is about abortion, has nothing to do with any of the rights. And I don't think most Americans are going to stand by and watch gay marriage be undone. They're not going to stand by and watch, Black civil rights being taken back or restrained or anything like that. That's political hogwash, and it's going to be used to try to scare and threaten voters. And I hope the voters are smart enough to know that really what we're talking about in this particular case is the very difficult topic of abortion. Most people I know on these other issues are either supportive or could care less. Okay. In other words, it's not going to be used, I don't think, to try to take back civil rights of other Americans in other aspects of their life, even though I promise you, Biden and his crew are already gearing up for that kind of argument. He said as such this week, as he was getting on Air Force One to go to do something. I don't know what he was talking about, how after this ruling, everybody's rights are imperiled, and that's just not true at all. It's about this case and about the way it's decided. And it also, would you hear people yell and say abortion is going to be outlawed across the country? That is not true at all. That is something to scare the voters. On the other hand, to be fair, about this, it's not going to be, if you are pro-life, you shouldn't think that this decision is going to ban abortion nationwide. It will not. It'll largely depend on your states. Okay, so yes, it will vary state by state, but the idea that abortion is now going to be outlawed across the country is not going to happen, no more than the attempt of the House and Senate next week to vote on it to make it a national law is going to happen either. Let me just go through Alito's opinions, okay? Because there's so much here that that some of it's been misrepresented, some of it has been distorted. And so I'll just go right to it, okay? I already read one of them about how Roe was, quote, egregiously wrong from the start. I've already read that one. But basically, he goes on to say, in the years prior to Roe versus Wade, about a third of the states had liberalized their laws, but Roe abruptly ended that political process. It imposed the same highly restrictive regime on the entire nation and effectively struck down the abortion laws of every single state. It represented the exercise of raw judicial power and sparked a national controversy that has embittered our political culture for half a century. And I agree with that. It has been a bitter argument for 50 years about, and this whole thing was short-circuited by that. And many, like I said before, abortion existed in many states prior to 1973. Now, these 6 gentlemen, led by Harry Blackmun, a Nixon appointee, ironically, basically said, no, here's the law for you. The Constitution was it was based on the right to privacy, which is not listed in the Constitution. It was a right that most Americans may have assumed that it had taken this right to privacy a step further than maybe many Americans wanted. But he's accurate in this statement. It did short circuit the whole legislative process, and it's led to this tremendous embitterment between the two sides. Just like, well, I'm not going to go there. Let's stop. Anyway, go on. Where's the other ones? There you go. All right, here's another one. He goes on to say, in some states, voters may believe that the abortion right should be even more extensive than the right Casey and Roe recognized. Voters in other states may wish to impose tight restrictions based on their belief that abortion destroys an unborn human being. Our nation's historical understanding of ordered liberty does not prevent the people's elected representatives from deciding how abortion should be regulated. That's true right now. The New York Times had a map about where the states stood on some of their abortions, and they have a lot of states have what they call so-called trigger laws based on if Roe is overturned. And so, California, for example, already has a law on the books that if Roe is overturned, they're going to have their own abortion regimen, and it's very expensive. I mean, it's up to the point of birth. Now, I don't approve of that at all, but I'm not in California. I don't like it, but I'm not in California. And if I were in California, the fact that I may be in the minority in that opinion, but I'd still have the political opportunity to try to affect legislative abilities and processes through my vote and my activism, whatever else, as opposed to going up against this iron wall here that, no, it's an enshrined right, as read by 6 men back in 1973. So if I don't like California's abortion laws and I'm in the minority, that's tough on my part. I may not like it. I may think it's terrible. That's a legislative process. Just like in other states, they have trigger laws that if Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned, it's going to be much more restrictive. Texas is one of them. Oklahoma is another. But again, if I am on the pro-choice side in Texas, I'll have my opportunity in November to vote for candidates that think like I do, as opposed to basically just having a court tell me what I'm already going to have to deal with. I think this is something that the readers of these opinions or the news one are not really cluing in on, is that there may very well be even more extensive abortion in certain states than there are right now. I again, as a pro-life person, I'm excited about that. I don't care for that, but I don't live in those states. And so I think Mr. Alito has it right here. Okay. Now, one of the arguments they had is that is the idea of stare decisis. In other words, the following of previously decided cases, the precedent. In other words, they said this is wrong to break precedent. Well, that's a ridiculous thing to think, because precedents are broken quite often, and some of them are absolutely essential to the freedoms of our country. If we did not break precedent in court, we'd still be living under Plessy v. Ferguson of 1896, which Mr. Alito refers to directly. Plessy v. Ferguson is the one that enshrines segregation in the public areas of our country, schools, hospitals, etc. It was overturned in 1954 when they broke precedent with Brown v. Board of Education. And many of the criminal reforms of the 1960s about search and seizure, about warrants, about needing an attorney if you can't afford one, but prayer in schools, all these other things that liberals rejoice in now, all broke precedent. I teach a constitutional law class, and the reason I teach those cases is not because they affirm what we already think. It's because they broke precedents. Some of the most famous cases in our history break precedent. This one is breaking Roe versus Wade, and people say, no, that's illegitimate because it's a settled law. There's no such thing as settled law. There's no such thing as settled law. But the point is that the overturning of precedent is something that's been part of our system since day one. The very act of judicial review in 1803, which was established then, broke precedent. In 1833, the courts ruled that the American Bill of Rights did not apply to state and local actions. In 1833, that began to be overturned in 1925 when that particular case, a case called Gitlow, overturned precedent. So that's a dead end argument with me about it's Roe is already there and it should remain enshrined. No, if we had enshrined Supreme Court precedent, then so many of the things that we like about our country, the freedoms we enjoy, would have been greatly, greatly restricted. So that's why I don't really get into that as much. He goes on, it talks about he says well, I'll read the longer quote here. We have long recognized, however, that stare decisis is not an exorable command. I hate that word. And it is at its weakest when we interpret the Constitution. It has been said that sometimes, and he's quoting other Supreme Court cases, by the way, when he says that, it has been said that sometimes more important that an issue be settled than it be settled right, which is what the Casey case tried to claim. Well, we don't know if it's right or not, but we're tired of arguing about it. So here it is. But when it comes to the interpretation of the Constitution, the great charter of our liberties, which was meant to endure through a long lapse of ages, we place a high value in having the matter settled right. On many other occasions, this court has overruled important constitutional decisions. Without these decisions, American constitutional law as we know it would be unrecognizable, and this would be a different country. So if we didn't want to break precedent, we'd still be living under the Dred Scott decision of 1857. Okay. And so he goes on to talk about how the Casey case, the one in 1982 particularly, try to claim it's settled in the argument. Basically said, this is your decision and whatnot, and we don't want to, we don't want any more about it because we've made our decree. And the dissenting opinion of Antonin Scalia was interesting, to say the least. And it was used in part by Mr. Alito. Antonin Scalia in 1992 said, the courts don't have this authority to settle the arguments. The people do on these type of issues. And so he was very volatile about how the courts are arrogant in the idea that they can just issue a ruling. These 5 people in the Casey case can issue a ruling supposedly to end the conversation about abortion, which obviously it did not. So there you go. Will this change? This ruling change? I tend to doubt it because I just don't see it happening. Now, can it happen? Sure. One of the most notorious cases was in 2012, and Mr. Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, changed his mind at the very last minute and upheld the funding mechanism for Obamacare. Up until like literally the couple of days before, he was going to vote against it, and the funding mechanism, which was that mandatory insurance, whatnot, was going to rule it unconstitutional. And he changed his mind because he's very, very concerned about the image of the court and its legitimacy. Here's the thing about the legitimacy of the court. The legitimacy of the court is always dependent on what they've ruled. And if they rule against you, it's illegitimate. If it's for it, it's legitimate. When 2014 and the Oberfels case, which is the case that allowed, or at least a constitutional support for the idea of gay marriage, the Democrats at the time said the court thus has spoken. And you had the White House in rainbow colors and all this other stuff, and it's okay. The courts has spoken, and it's legitimate. Now, when they say this, it's illegitimate, and Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and others are casting illegitimacy on the courts, that it's not a legitimate court of the people. This kind of politics is what makes our country so difficult now, is because I mentioned this on one of my Facebook postings a couple of days ago, is that when I win the election, it's fair and square. When I lose it, there's fraud. Okay. If I don't get my way on this bill, then like Joe Biden did get the way on the voting bill in 2021, the 2022 elections are illegitimate now. 2016, Trump cheated because of the Russians. In 2020, the Democrats cheated because of false voting and all this other business. And so this constantly casting illegitimacy on our institutions is destroying our country. And so when we go through these processes of controversial decisions and we don't like it, therefore, it's illegitimate. It's wrong. It's, you could think it's decided wrongly, but they're not just saying it's decided wrongly. What they're saying is they don't have the legitimate power to make this decision. That's what they're saying. It's one thing for pro-choice side, Nancy Pelosi, et cetera, to say we disagree with this very, very strongly. It's another thing to say the court is not just wrong, but it's also illegitimate, and they don't have the authority, and therefore they should be ignored. But to nullify that decision, this is what led to the Civil War. Exactly what led to the Civil War. When the North and the South refused to abide by the edicts of their government and the courts, you saw what happened, of course. So, Lastly, he says, we do not pretend to know how our political system or society will respond to today's decision overruling Roe and Casey. Even if we could foresee what will happen, even if we could see what will happen. Oh, I had something popped up on my screen. I'm sorry. Try it again. Even if we could foresee what will happen, we will have no authority to let that knowledge influence our decision. We can only do our job, which is to interpret the law, apply longstanding principles of stare decisis, and decide this case accordingly. We therefore hold that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey must be overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion must be returned to the people and their elected representatives. So when you hear people shouting and hollering that abortion is going to be outlawed across the country, they're misreading it intentionally, in my opinion. But again, for us here in Texas, we're going to have probably a much more restrictive abortion policy than, say, Colorado or Vermont. But we're not Colorado, we're not Vermont. And if you want our state to be more like Colorado and Vermont on this issue, the ball's in your court. Now, yeah, you're going to have a uphill battle, but it's a battle you can now take on as opposed to relying on the courts and who's going to be elected president and whose justices he's going to appoint and and all this other hair pulling. But it's a battle you're going to be able to participate in now, and more than just waving signs. If you feel strongly enough about this, you're going to be able to elect somebody that feels strongly about it too, one way or the other. The ball is in our court. And I'm going to end this with two points. One is, and I've seen this, is that a lot of people criticize this because it doesn't reflect the majority. The majority of people on the issue of abortion is all over the spectrum, and so I don't know what the true majority is. I could say that I know a lot of people on both sides of the issue, mostly on the pro-life side, because I'm a Baptist and go to church, et cetera, et cetera. And I usually vote conservative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know anybody that in my side of the argument, if you will, that says we should ban abortion in all cases. I don't know anybody like that. I don't know anybody on my side of the argument that says 100% ban. Most people I know are very, very reluctant or opposed maybe to abortion as an elective procedure or a sex selection process, or if the child is maybe obviously going to have some sort of problem like Down syndrome, and using that as a means for an excuse for abortion. They do not like the fact that it's used as birth control almost. But most people I know want to make exceptions for health of the mother. Most people I know want to make exceptions for forced pregnancies like rape or incest. Even, some of the best God-fearing Christians I know acknowledge the difference between inconvenient and unexpected pregnancies and forced pregnancies. And most Christians I know want to leave that door open for those situations. Now, there's some that are maybe more conservative about it than I am, but that's where most of them end up. And on the other side, the pro-choice, I know nobody on the pro-choice side of the argument who advocates anytime, any place, anywhere, up to the moment of birth. I don't know anybody like that. I have several pro-choice friends. We have not broken fellowship over this, which I'm glad to say because it speaks to their character. But even those that are considered themselves pro-choice do not advocate a wide open regime where basically at any time, any purpose, any reason, any place. They want it regulated. They want it, controlled. They want it protected, but they don't want it unlimited. And the extremes are driving this argument. Now, again, I say this as somebody who's pro-life. I'm going to also, I'm going to wait to hold that comment just for a minute because I have one more thing I want to say about the courts. A lot of people criticizing the courts for saying that they don't reflect the will of the majority. The courts are not supposed to reflect the will of the majority. They're not designed to reflect the will of the majority. The courts, by definition, are there to protect rights which are written and created for the minority. The Bill of Rights about free speech is not for what I'm doing here necessarily. It's for those fringe elements that we have to tolerate. Okay, their freedom of religion isn't for, as Baptists or whatever else. They're fairly mainstream. It's for those type of religious thoughts that maybe we think a bit weird, but they're entitled to have them. Okay, the criminal defendant protections in the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment are not meant for the mainstream. It's meant for the minority, which are criminal defendants, guilty or not. The Bill of Rights is written to protect the minority, and so is the court. The court is there to protect the rights, not reflect the passing political will of the majority. If the courts were designed for that, none of those criminal law reforms in the 1960s ever would have taken place. The vast majority of Americans were opposed to some of the restrictions placed on warrants that the court put on in the Mapp versus Ohio case. The majority of American people were not supportive of integration in 1954 when the court ruled 9-0 to begin the process anyway, of ending segregation. That was not a reflection of the popular will. 1896, the case it overturned, was a reflection of the popular will, and it's one of the most poorly decided cases ever, the separate but equal case. So the idea that the courts are ruling against the will of the majority, yeah, they normally do. Alito was right. They're not there to reflect the popular will of the majority at that moment. They're there to reflect hopefully the longstanding values of the Constitution and other means of interpreting it through case law. And if by definition it goes against the will of the majority, then that's why we have courts. All right. So I won't make that particular. Now, I'm going to address my fellow pro-life Republican conservative people. I understand why you rejoice in this decision. I like the fact that the states are going to be able to handle the abortion issue. And as a pro-life person, I've always been opposed to the very, very liberal regime of abortion that Roe versus Wade and the Casey cases have put there. So I really haven't addressed the content in like, okay, I'm going to try to convince you that pro-life is better than pro-choice, because that'd be an endless argument. But I am going to tell you now, to those who rejoice in this decision, I'm glad that abortion is going to be greatly restricted. However, what that also means for us, that we need to understand that pro-life doesn't end at birth. That means pro-life goes on and on and on until they reach adulthood. You can't call yourself pro-life and say, because I oppose abortion, and then want to impose very restrictive fiscal policies on helping those with children. You can't take the attitude, well, they're not my kids, therefore I shouldn't be paying for it. Pro-life is a full lifetime commitment. It should be anywhere on our part. That's why I'm so supportive of Next Step Women's Center and other groups like that, because they're there to support not just for the birth, but the events that come after it. Training for parenthood, training for trying to deal with those issues, financial and physical needs being met. We need to make sure schools are adequately funded and adequately staffed and adequately supplied. That's pro-life. We need to make sure that Medicare is adequately funded, adequately staffed, adequately supplied. That's pro-life. Yeah, I hope I said Medicaid. That's what I really meant to say. Medicaid. I mean, because Medicare, I guess, could say the same, but Medicaid. I hope, for pro-life, it means that we got to make sure that regardless if that's our child or not, as a society, we got to make sure that the children in our society grow up with adequate needs being met. And sometimes, yes, that means taxes. That means public provision. That means policies distributed by the state or county. Okay? Pro-life, any pro-life position that says my responsibility is to get that child in this world and then I'm done is only half the fight. Pro-life means if you really want to be happy about this decision, you need to understand that we're going to have more children in this world, and they're going to need these things, and they're going to be needed through public provision. And it means we can't be always looking for the way to decrease taxes all the time, because it might go to people that we don't approve of. So pro-life guys, the ball is in your court. You want to be pro-life? Be pro-life. I'm pro-life. But that also means pony up and remind ourselves that as Americans, and if we want to call ourselves Christians, yes, we are our brother's keeper. So I urge you to support groups like Next Step. I urge you to support other groups similar to that provide for the public, like Children's Advocacy Center over in Cleburne. I urge you to support these organizations that are not just intent on making sure the child is born, but the child is adequately taken care of, even if it means, yes, the dreaded government program. So I hope the people that rejoice in this decision realize the responsibility that Samuel Alito has put on you. And I hope the people that support this decision react with compassion and not arrogance, react with understanding and not condemnation. Yes, I hope that this greatly reduces abortions. It won't eliminate them, certainly, like I've been making clear, but I hope it reduces it. But it also means we, as Americans, and if we want to call ourselves Christians, we're going to have to step up to the plate and make sure that the children born into this world, because that the additional children that are born in this world are adequately taken care of and educated and supplied for. And I hope that this brings some clarity to the issue. So to sum this up, I appreciate, again, the sponsors allowing me to give my 2 cents on this. I hope, please share this with your friends and with your various groups. I think it's important that the message gets out, not just about what's gone on with the Supreme Court and what the Alito ruling really says, but also about the responsibility that now we have as voters and as citizens has been given back to us, or will be as soon as this is published, but it's going to be given back to us, and we're going to have to deal with this. And you're going to have to make sure your elected representatives understand they can't duck and dodge behind a Supreme Court ruling anymore. So I thank the sponsors. I thank Taylor for making time out today.
And of course.
How was it?
It was great.
Oh, great. Yeah. Okay, fine. Whatever. On Monday, I have Brock DeWald playing some of his new music, and so we'll be able to, and I'm working, by the way, kind of coincidentally enough, I guess, on Tuesday, I'm trying to get together with this adoption agency group. It's not an agency. That's not a good word. It's a pro-adoption group. And we're trying to work out the details. And it may be Tuesday, it may not be. And then on Friday, I have Re-Inspire with Shandy talking about how she's helping, her group is helping kids that are aging out of the foster system, how they're helping them adjust to adulthood and whatnot, which is an example of pro-life. Shandy's Re-Inspire group is an example of pro-life. Okay, now, I hope to see you on Monday.